And I want to bump this up to Oscar and Nicole. You guys are doing amazing stuff in Spokane, and I think folks are going to be really interested to hear about your work, about the history of your work, and the future of your work. So Oscar and Nicole, take it away.
Oh, good morning. Good morning. I am looking at the slide, and this looks like the old presentation. So if it's if we don't have the new one, we can work around that as well.
Let's just
Stand
flow
by.
with it.
Jake or Anshia.
Yep, I'm just waiting for Jake to come in because we did get the new one which we uploaded. So let me give Jake just 1 second.
This is the one I have as the. Give me 1 second.
It's okay. While you're doing that, one thing that we can do, we can go ahead and kind of start a little bit. First of all, Rebecca, thank you for very much so sharing the information that you shared around the equity resolution. And even at the beginning of it, because I would say before we even really jump in it too deeply, that more than resonates with many things that we actually talked about and actually guided some of our thinking. But to start with the introduction, my name is Oscar Harris. I am the Chief Family and Community Engagement Officer for Spokane Public Schools. I'll say my role involves a whole lot of miscellaneous stuff, but I think the overarching thing that I'm responsible for is to be engaging our community and helping to assist our team as we begin to start engaging our community in what I call innovative strategies that's going to lead us to be able to build equitable bridges between a community and school. And what that has to do with is we have various programming that is connected to us and to our department in particular, and even a little history on that. I'll probably share a little bit more about that a little later, but it all started with how do we provide high-level service to families to where they can feel connected to a school district that's the size of ours. So on that, I'm going to pass it off to Nicole.
So I'm Nicole Jenkins, Rosencrantz, and I am the Director of Community Relations and Partnerships. I've been with the district. This is actually, next week will be my 3rd year with the district. And before that, I was at juvenile court for 17 years. And that's actually what led me to working for the district was the beginning of my career at juvenile court. I started as a corrections officer, and at the end, I was supervising our diversion program. And as I was getting cases across my desk from out in the community, a lot of them are coming from our school district. And I started really looking deeper into, what the charges were. And there was things like trespassing, but the trespassing charge was because somebody was suspended. And when they were told to leave, they sat on the east bench instead of the west bench. And so, just stuff like that. And I started thinking like, really, we're going to start criminal history, off of a student using what little power that they had to sit on, the bench they wanted to sit on. And that's how my relationship with Spokane Public Schools began. I just did some cold calling the directors and let them know that, I wanted them to really understand what they were doing by starting criminal history off of these things. And so with that, that's how I ended up at Spokane Public Schools. I started as just as partnerships. I was going to help just kind of be the bridge between child serving organizations that wanted to do proactive things within the district. But really in the back of my mind, it was how do we not just disrupt, but end the school to prison pipeline. And so that is what has led to our work and receiving this wonderful grant, and go from there.
Cool. And so today we are going to be talking about, our equity resolution, which really involve equitable practices that we truly believe can help combat and prevent youth violence. Because at the core of behavior, we all know is a form of communication. And it's nothing, I think, more debilitating and frustrating to be not just overlooked, discounted, but openly have your humanity trampled upon time and time again, which I think ultimately leads sometimes to youth acting certain type of manners in which we call antisocial and various other behaviors. But our goal is all going to be cemented to the work around our equity resolution. And Nicole and I, we work very close, and our whole entire team, which I'm giving a shout out to our whole entire team. Thank you for being here. Thank you for representing us. Hey, and thank you OJJDP as well as James. Thank you, and crew. Thank you for having us, because this is such a exciting opportunity to be able to work with other counterparts and etc. All right, it looked like my internet clicker is not working, but I don't know if I need to put the code back in, but if I do, I can. But if until then, someone let me know on the technical side. Do I need to reboot it?
Yeah, just try re-entering the code, because I had to go out and in.
Okie dokie.
If that doesn't work, just say next slide and I'll do it for you.
Okay, well, we'll do it together. How about this? You can go to the next slide, and I'm going to actually probably, we're going to be talking and working technical difficulties.
So again, just a shout out for, we're very thankful for receiving this grant. Next slide, please.
And so as we begin to start looking at Spokane, I think to really understand our presentation, you have to understand the context of which it's coming from. Spokane, many of you know about Gonzaga, but Spokane within itself, outside of Gonzaga, it is a very unique place in terms of the demographics. You're talking about Spokane County proper is around almost 500,000 people. And we have 4 seasons, and that within a 30-mile radius, I think we have 40 or 50 lakes. We have a mountain in the backdrop. So a beautiful place full of evergreens and etc. It also has a history of being right next to, since it's right next to Idaho, northern Idaho, being real in proximity to what we'll call a hate count, right? An Aryan count that was very much so there. So history of Spokane dealing with different types of hate incidents and everything also flows to be such a beautiful place, could have such a stigma or such an ugly mark as racism on it as well. But even with that being said, I'll say it's a place that is growing. I can say it still is not a place that's very diverse, because I said around almost 500,000 people, and of the 500,000 people, you would see that the percentage of, as far as diversity concerned, probably is going to be, I don't know, Nicole, what would you say, 20% maybe?
I think we're about 96, 97% Caucasian.
Yes. So I'm sorry, my number was a little high. So 3% as far as in the diversity arena. And I think it provides a unique opportunity though, because Spokane is known, most people will tell you it's the smallest city that think it's very large, even though it, in comparison to other places, it is considered to be rather large. But that adds a few elements that I think are very important, because when you begin to start looking at the demographic data of Spokane Public Schools, you're going to note that in comparison to the population, we are actually rather diverse as a school district. Starting with 30,000, average around 30,000 students, considered the second largest school district in the state of Washington. And you'll see the breakdown of the numbers. I won't necessarily go through it, but if you look at it, 66% Caucasian, and then the rest of percentage of our BIPOC descent. And you would also see 77% of English language learners, 70 different languages represented within Spokane Public Schools. Additionally, we have over 110 different tribes of sovereign nations being represented as far as Indian reservations and etc. And our socioeconomic status is 59% being of lower income. And so next, we can go over a little bit more data, and Nicole.
Yes, so we're going to put the data in for the data nerds. However, I am not a data nerd, so I'm going to do my best to go through this piece just for some context. So, so this data and talk about this process SPS went through prior to the creation of the resolution. So when this work start, how was it built, and challenges that we encountered. So this data slide, and you'll see on the next few slides is taken from the 2019-2020 school year. Washington State closed public schools on March 13th due to COVID, and the data you see from the start of the school year 2019 to the 130th day of school. So Spokane Public Schools has been collecting this data on suspensions and expulsions for a number of years. We chose the 2019-2020 school year to show that even though we have made a substantial progress compared to years prior, figures encountered in the graphs are alarming and there was substantial need for action. So as you can see from this graph, with the exception of the Asian and Pacific Islander youth, rates of suspensions and expulsions for youth of color and youth engaged in special education are higher in their representative percentage. Sorry, of course, now I have something in my eye. Next, please. And on this slide, with the exception of special education and Asian youth, the rest percentages for all other youth of color are higher than their representative percentage in the population. The rate of arrest for African American, multiracial, and Native American youth is over double. African American students comprise 3% of the population, while accounting for 6.1% of arrests. Multiracial students comprise 13% of the population, while making up 29.6% of the arrests. And Native American students comprise 1% of the population, while making up 2.4% of the arrests. Pacific Islander youth, while not quite doubling, make up 2% of the population, while making up 3.7% of the arrests. And Hispanic youth comprise of 11% of the population, while making up 12.3% of the rest. There was no arrest data for Asian or Pacific, or special education youth. Next slide. And let's see. Let's go one more slide. Okay, so, and here you can see the previous graph compared to the same set of data with addition of population percentage exclusion and arrests for Caucasian youth. So Caucasian youth make up 67% of the population, but only made up 56% of exclusions and 5.6% of arrests. So, talking about a racial equity resolution, so very similar to what Rebecca was talking about earlier about, the timing of what was going on in our nation. So in the summer, the school board came to our superintendent and said, we want to make a statement. We wanted our community and our families to know that we care. And with that, our superintendent came to our office, Department of Family and Community Engagement, and talked about, what would a statement look like? And me, just to get a little personal, in that time frame, I was really struggling. I have a son who's 21 years old, and I just kept perseverating on, he was going to show up at the wrong place, with everything that was going on. And, I just decided that he was getting ready, he was gone, like something bad was getting ready to happen to him. And so when we were approached by the superintendent, for me, I was just I'm a very direct communicator. So my very direct blunt was like, okay, well, a statement actually wouldn't make me feel better. Like, we care about you and we're thinking about you. Like, that's not really going to make me feel better. What's going to make me feel better is if we come up with some action steps that are going to go with the statement. And so that's where resolution was born, where we began drafting from that point. Next slide, please. Oscar, I will check. Is this okay, so for this one, this is me still. So the resolution acknowledges excellence for everyone is the mission statement of SPS, yet this opportunity has not been made possible for every student. Structural racism is built into our institution. Anti-racism is required to increase student empowerment, belonging, value, and hope for the future. We continue to listen and partner with community stakeholders, educators, parents, and students.
Okay, and next, piggybacking off of when we talk about partnerships, a little bit about myself. My doctoral work is in community and family engagement. So when it comes to that particular area, that's the area that I not only gravitate toward, but a lot of my work revolves around it. And so right now what I want to do is we're going to introduce key stakeholders that was at the table either prior to the drafting of the equity resolution and even after. But I would say our partnership and our relationships has been true to the nature of what I would call partnership and relationships that can be very constructive. So if I can have you a minute just to imagine your community partners right now, your community stakeholders, right? And when you're thinking about a few of them, I want you to stretch a little bit, and I want you to think about the ones that that you kind of dread having to work with. I pause only for a moment because my assumption is that most of us are going to have community partners that we may dread working with a little bit. And it's not because we dislike them as people, it's because we dislike how they navigate the world, how they come into our culture as school district cultures, right? And end up, you know, trying to inform us about how to navigate, how to do different types of things. And they have sometimes only a couple modes or modalities to use. I mean, am I seeing some head nods? You know, someone coming in, tell you what all the problems are, and then openly tell you at the end of the day, fix it. And you're like, how am I going to fix it? I don't even know if I really understand what you're saying, what the problem is. If you have that kind of situation going on, I would say you have the perfect environment to actually begin to co-create something that could actually transform your whole community. Because typically when individuals come to the table, they are passionate about wanting change, right? And sometimes I think that all of us have a role to play in as we begin to start transforming our communities for the better of everybody. I think we need some individuals who may be considered the agitators. I think we need some people who are going to be very much there who can actually put pen to paper. I think we need people who can write policies. I think also, watch this plug. I think there's also people, James, who needs to be there to provide grant funding. How about that? So I would include everybody in there as we begin to start looking at what it means to truly be able to transform our community, our schools to a place to where, you know, as our vision statement says for Spokane Public Schools, excellence for everyone can be realized. So our community stakeholders, we have every Student Council Alliance, we have a superintendent work group, and I'll say every Student Council Alliance started out of, as of a few years back, I'll say 5 or 6 years ago, as a district, there was a lawsuit potential that was going to happen, you know, for us from various community organizations, because they was looking at our disproportionality data and et cetera. And what we end up drafting is a resolution that end up forming the superintendent work group, to where we brought community partners to the table, no matter who they were. And as a school district, we primarily just listen. Whatever they had to say, we listen. And eventually we start to evolve to a place that we could work together. But true to being able to work with trauma and learning how to be cultural responsive to situations, we have to be able to listen for a while before we begin to start trying to figure out what the problem is. And I think that's what challenged so many times, challenge school districts and et cetera. We don't want to put the time in sometimes to listen because we don't have time per se, but if we don't have time today, you will have time on tomorrow because of the issues that may arise. We also have Teen Child, legal advocacy, diversity advisory council, which Nicole leads. Nicole can talk about it a little bit.
Yes, so DAC is it's made up of community stakeholders, from other child serving agencies that are really pushing the district on staff diversity and really looking at the exclusions and arrests and those things. So they're the ones that have really kept, so that reports directly to the board. And so at the end of the year of meeting and SPS coming in and telling the community what's going on, then they give recommendations to the board where the money should go. So more emphasis on resources and innovative programming and those kind of things. That's what DAC pushes for.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. And also we have various student advisory councils. Dan, during this time when we was first looking at the superintendent work group, we had one in particular, and this was a group of students that was coming from our 6 different high schools in Spokane that was advising our superintendent on what was happening within the building. And so next, transitioning to the resolution tasks, as we call them. One thing that when we begin to start talking about our equity resolution, which it ultimately began to start, I would say, shaking things around us. And I would say timing was perfect. Also, in addition to timing, from having a team that had a diverse perspectives in terms of what it would mean to kind of support the system, to improve the experiences of students, staff, and families, we was able to bounce ideas off each other to come up with what we call a pretty comprehensive equity resolution. And the task that was developed with it was to actually come up with a strategic plan using a racial equity lens in every SPS goal and objective by spring 2021. That's in the works right now. So our board of directors, as well as our superintendent, is working on that right now. Employee training was an element, making sure that all new employees would have to participate in anti-racism, culturally responsive training before working with students. In addition to looking at that, we will look at our training manuals, because we know that we have certain trainings within our school district that are mandatory, and because they can be linked to something that can get litigious. But when we begin to start looking at race and equity, we have to go beyond that and begin to start saying, yes, we can protect ourselves against lawsuit, but how about protecting our children and our family and making sure their souls don't get wounded by someone who maybe unintentionally says something, acts a certain way toward them. So this was a huge thing for us, and it's rolling out even right now with HR, and our department actually not contracts, but work directly with HR on coming up with strategies for these. Written within that is all current employees. We'll have the anti-racism professional development. Our Washington Education Association is already and have been rolling out cultural responsive training for the last few years. We're talking about cultural responsive training for our school community, because something that's very important, even as we begin to start looking at the resolution, and I would tell and encourage anybody, this is not a school district alone task to take upon yourself. Because if you do not bring your family along with you, if you do not bring your community along with you, you're going to be fighting not just an uphill battle, you're going to be fighting an impossible battle, because many of the people who you need are going to be community advocates to be right there to cheer you on and sometimes to push you along while you're doing such difficult work. And the other thing is making sure that we have sustained dialogue between building staff and the community, because built within the school culture, as most of us know, normally we would, outside of separation of church and state, we had a thing called separation of community and school, right? Now, parents, stay where you are at, and schools will stay where we're at, and you can't get to the goal of educating all students to their highest potential when you have that type of thing going. But it was very germane to our school culture. So working on that element as well. Another piece that is huge when we begin to start looking at equity, right, and being culturally responsive, is being able to explore what are we teaching within schools? Are students seeing themselves represented within the curriculum? And that has been an ongoing report that we've got from the community, how kids are not seeing themselves within the literature. And, when it comes to, to our Native American populations, there was many complaints about how when schools taught about Native American history, they always put Native Americans in teepees and various other things, which really denigrated what they had going on as far as their culture. And they would often say, we're still living, don't put us in those things. And so we're looking at curriculum, we're looking at student agency, we're looking at project-based learning and competency-centered structures for grading, course completion, as well as advancement. Because when we begin to start looking at what it means to support support the whole child and every child. We cannot look at just the structure that we've had for over 100 years, right? That ultimately, I think of what percentage, at least it worked for 80, 85%. But when you look at the rest of that percentage, it's never have worked for them. So this is another great, huge undertaking that we're constantly engaged in right now with our chief academic officer leading the charge. Another huge component when you begin to start looking at equity is, where is student voice? It's amazing to me the brilliance that students will surface when we give them the opportunity. And so something that we're doing, that we're actually increasing, is collecting more input from our students around racial equity. Because as we look at culture shift, even though racism and various elements don't shift, I would say how our kids understand it and interact with it does. And so as we're trying to develop systems and structures to better support our students, we have to have them in the process. And this is what this is about. And we have various things that we're doing to get at that, such as we have surveys through our Panorama survey system that we've been sending out. You know, I think we sent it out in December to hear from students on their experiences, their encounters, their perception of how schools are more equitable or not. We also have listening sessions that's been happening since last summer. You know, with the pandemic, I have to be careful with my time frame because it seemed like we've been like, what, 5 or 10 years in 1 year. So I have to be careful with that. But we've been having consistent listening sessions to really get that input from students, and also to let them know that we're at a time to where we need you. One thing I can tell you of great benefit, unfortunately, that comes out of times of crises, innovation surfaces, and we become more cognizant of the human experience and how we support the people around us, our loved ones, our colleagues, and et cetera. And lastly on this, one thing that's within the equity resolution is that we will start multicultural clubs at every school to be able to give kids the opportunity, or students the opportunity, or young adults the opportunity to be able to engage with their peers around difficult topics, because we know a lot of the challenges, even when we begin to start talking about school violence, it's rare that we find someone engaged in high levels of school violence who has a strong support network and is very much so connected to adults and students in school. Next, Nicole, is this you?
Yes, thank you. So providing an increase in training and resources to staff and students allows each to perform to the best of their ability. So their success is not hampered by inaccessibility or exclusion. So improving successful outcomes and participation, while at the same time increasing belonging, sense of community, decreases the likelihood of violence and victimization, and improves the school climate. So with that, let's see, next. So as you can see, I'm not going to read exactly what's on the slide, so don't be confused by that. Okay, so resources and training. So as part of that, providing an increase in training and resources to staff and students allows each to perform to the best of their ability. So their success is not hampered by, that's the same thing I just said. Okay, so let me tell you some of the things that we've been doing for training. So one of the things that Oscar mentioned was cultural responsive training. Some new things that we rolled out this year and that I have been a part of that I would like to share have been pretty impactful is one thing, and this is a resource for everyone to write down, is the intercultural development inventory. This inventory is a questionnaire that's about 50 questions, and what it does is it each individual takes it and it places them on an intercultural competence continuum, and it starts at denial, so not noticing that things are even going on in the world, all the way to adaptation, and that's the action steps of like really doing anti-racist work. And what we've done with that is schools have contacted me who have an interest in taking that, and then with that comes a one-on-one hour with me, a feedback session about the intercultural, what it means, intercultural competence means, and where they land on the continuum. And then it comes with a plan as well, which is a step-by-step how to move forward should they want to do their own work. And then a year later, we can offer folks to take it again and see if they've increased in their intercultural competence. So I've done that with about 5 or 6 schools so far who have reached out and wanted to do that. On top of that, we've done book studies. And so with me, we talked about the action steps, right? So it's not the normal book study where we read a book and then we see, oh yes, I can see my students in this book and I can see how things should be different, but we just have that knowledge and we don't move forward with the action steps. So with that, it actually has action steps with such as, so for instance, one book study was a young adult book called Dear Martin. And with that book, we talked about microaggressions. And with that, I had the schools really talk about microaggressions that they've seen and then that they've experienced, and then what is their plan together, like when there is an oops and there's an ouch, how are they going to resolve that? So that ties into restorative practices as well. So with that, next slide, thank you.
Additionally, when you're beginning to look at changing a system to where it's able to serve all, you have to look at hiring considerations as well as the different type of positions that you have. Our, Spokane Public Schools, we pretty much in our equity resolution committed to continue to work with Spokane Educational Association. But one particular area that we really looked at is our campus resource officers. As well as look at what does policing look like in our school. I can say to our credit, after really honing in and looking at things the last 5 years, we brought, I think, our arrests down in 1 year from 800 and something to like 20, 30, maybe 40. In 1 year, the number dropped significantly. And we've celebrated that, but being who we are, we wanted to go a little bit farther. We wanted to say, okay, when we began to start looking at individuals bringing in and representing what safety is in our building, how could we have a more collective approach and we could help our safety specialists, which they are called right now, to not just look at what safety looks like within a school, but how can they engage even more with the children that are present, the young adults that are present, and et cetera. And we have a model that's going to help them to where they can fulfill that role. Because something that can be unfair for someone who's trained in law enforcement is to put them in an environment and you want them to not just be honing in on threats, but you want them to be able to connect with children, right? Have high levels of social emotional capacity and competency going on. And so something I'll say we as a district begin to start looking at and the question was, is it possible to have individuals within our school that can help with safety, but at the same time, will not have a need to arrest? So that's something we looked at. How do we move away from arrest and work with our local law enforcement, which is outside of the school district? And I know that models, some school districts have their own police force within them, and some people contract with the sheriff department or police department. We contract with the police department, but we had this interesting blend going on, but we're working and we're getting ready to conclude it to where we're getting a model that we want for inside our schools. And something that we continue to do is throughout the whole process that I talked about is engage our community partners. We have a subcommittee of community partners who have a vested interest in student safety, school safety, and we work with them, take their advisement, work with school staff, and try to come up with a plan. Something else that we're looking at doing, which I've heard many school districts talk about this, is especially when I say probably the Pacific Northwest, as well as the farther you go kind of north, sometimes the colder you get, sometimes it's difficult to get diverse people to come and be in the snow. As a matter of fact, side note, my family, every time I talk to them about visiting me in Spokane, Washington, since I'm originally from Arkansas, they tell me it's cold, that it always snows. So as a side note, when this fluke snowstorm hit them, I kind of sent a Facebook post say, don't ever tell me about it being cold and everything, because we're warmer than you are right now. But that's a side note. But when we begin to start looking at what do it mean to establish goals and work toward increasing workforce diversity, one thing is there has to be the investment of resources for recruitment and retention, and recruitment and retention has to be culturally responsive, because what ends up happening is oftentimes for diverse population, again, someone's going to pick Florida. I don't know if anybody from Florida on the line, Florida the beach or Hawaii the beach, and come to Spokane, which I love, fishing, mountain, hiking, bears, lions, oh my, all that stuff. But guess what? When you begin to start looking at it, who's going to pick that to come to a particular place? And often what we've seen and what I've experienced is that people will pick a place, especially now in this culture, based upon the environment they're in as far as the work environment. So if you have a strong team, strong support, if you have affinity groups, you have various things, you can get diverse staff come, but you have to look at those things, because it's one thing to recruit, it's another thing to retain and make sure that when you bring someone from a diverse background to a place like Spokane, you know, have you hooked them up with the barbershop yet, right? Have you took them to places to where they can find food that's particular to their culture? All this stuff is very important, which you typically in school districts that I know about would normally think about, but you have to think outside the box if you want to have different diverse staff. Other thing that we're looking at is when we begin to start looking at diversifying, we want to get even more an expert opinion as well as contract with a person of color-led consulting company, which can kind of help us, you know, diversify and establish different types of strategies as we begin to start looking at how to diversify our workforce. And we're also looking in, and I kind of shared this earlier, the investment in the development of personal color-led multicultural club in every single school, which is 54, a little bit over 54 schools. And we're partnering with the Diversity Advisory Council to propose a specific model for that. Something else that we look at that was kind of talked about earlier, that's within the equity resolution, we're looking at racial discrimination and exclusionary disciplinary. We're looking to enhance that process of which we receive complaint, because often what I discovered, and many of you probably have discovered, is that it is something about when you experience a microaggression or racism to where it is not as concrete as some of the other acts that can happen against a person. So what we've discovered is over a period of time, you would have parents so frustrated to where they won't report anymore. Because they'll be like, wait a minute, because people are going to ask me 100 questions. And I know when it feels like to be discriminated against, but sometimes I can't tell you exactly what they did to do it. But I know when it happens because it's built within my bones, right? It's built within my culture to know when it happens. But since we're so used to this structure to where we're saying it has to be so linear, okay, A, B, and C. A person said this, check. A person did this, check. You felt harm a certain type of way, check. And we know that racial discrimination, you can't look at it that way. So we're looking actually at our policies on how to report discrimination, as well as how to report harassment, intimidation, and bullying. And we have a couple drafts that has been we're working on even right now with our superintendent. We're also looking at, you know, how can we continue to gather community feedback on how to address racism, because going back to what we started with, it's one thing to be able to acknowledge that racism exists. It's one thing to be able to acknowledge that an instance of racism has happened. It's a whole nother thing to be able to come up with a strategy or a plan of how you're going to address it, right? Because for some, you know that it's out of ignorance that they're doing different types of things. Some, it may be blatant, but we have to begin to start looking at the mechanisms that's in place that, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but I have to say it, but they was built to protect someone who end up doing those actions, unfortunately, since our system has not been transformed over a while. So we have to look at those core elements and get community feedback and get feedback from professionals, and we have to bring staff and community along with us. Another thing that I can say that our community is very excited about is our looking at an OnBuzz Person process. Certain districts already have a process in place. We have an informal process in place with our Department of Family and Community Engagement, because anytime a complaint, no matter what it is, if someone reaches out to us in our department, we go in and walk alongside the parent, typically work with staff. And within our department, we also have our restorative practices manager who kind of guide the process a little bit. So we look to work with families, but something we want to do to kind of beef it up a little bit more is increase the pathways of which parents can report, because we know sometimes from fear of retaliation, individuals don't want to report to school staff. Students don't want to report to teachers because of fear of retaliation. So we're enhancing that process, trying to build a portal to where students can, and parents and families and staff can actually report more anonymously different things that happen with us, and we follow up and kind of investigate those things, as well as have our title, I think it's our Title IX person who's over civil rights, kind of look into those particular things. But we're looking at a two-tiered approach when it comes down to our OnBuzz Person process. If someone's looking for someone within the district and they're okay with it, they can reach out to the Department of Family Community Engagement. But if they feel as if they're not comfortable with an insider, we're actually contracting with some individuals in the community who can be those objective OnBuzz individuals to kind of help us as a school district. And you know, that kind of concludes what we have going on. I'm sorry for speaking so fast, but James, I was trying to stick with our time. I was trying to stick with some time in here. And so next we can move on to questions and etc.
I love it. I love it. You still have a half hour. So you got like at least another 15 minutes to go. So keep on rolling. No, I think that was really terrific. You know, really insightful thoughts about what you all are all doing. And, you know, I think the comment about, you know, that words, they're not terribly helpful. It's the actions, it's what comes with it. Mm-hmm. And what y'all are doing there with the actions that are defined in the resolution are amazing. And I guess my first question would be, you know, since the year that has passed with this resolution in place, you know, what are some of the changes that you've seen from the students, from staff, and from the community? And, you know, I guess across those three spectrums.
Cool.
Definitely with the community, I would say that we shocked them. They almost fell over with the equity resolution, right? It was not something that they expected or saw would ever come. The other thing about Spokane is we're it's a pretty conservative community. And so with that, it also came at a cost. And so that's something to think about when, like, again, yes, we're going to do what's right, but it comes at a cost. And right now we have a very diverse school board, which is the most diverse that it has ever been. And so I think, again, that's something that drives the work. But all of this, you know, it needs there's layers and layers and layers of work. So it doesn't just take, you know, ambition, but it also takes, you know, understanding that it's going to come at a cost. So I can say, you know, there's a portion that have been very excited and have really been walking alongside us in this, and we actually gained a lot of trust from members that have been pushing for change. So that has been fun to watch and exciting. And then students as well. I've gone and presented at some classes just about, you know, the why behind the equity resolution and where it came from. And this is something that they have been wanting for years. And we even have some students who are talking about now going into education because of seeing this. And so that has been super impactful.
Yes, I would also say, you know, speaking about the differences that done happen in school, I think it was a breath of fresh air for a lot of staff, even within our school, even staff who don't identify necessarily as being, you know, culturally diverse, even though everyone is to a certain degree, right? We found a lot of individuals trying to implement the equity resolution, and it was exciting. I do have to tell you, a challenge can be when you have to do cleanup. I'll say that's the only challenges that can be, because we had many individuals that would start out with the wrong book to start with. Like, you know, White Fragility is not the first book out of the gate if you ain't had exposure to what's going on, right? Or so you want to talk about race, that's not a book right out of the gate. Those are, you know, you got to go to step 2, right? Step 3 before you start doing that. So you would have, you know, different leaders who would lead out with that, and it would ultimately cause their staff to be so in this place all over the place. And so that's why I like so much about what Nicole does, and she does an excellent job with it, with the IDI. That helps, and that's, I mean, if you haven't taken it and experienced it, I recommend it. It helps us to actually create the foundation to build upon. It's a non-threatening, non-offensive way to help a person realize where they're on a continuum, right? It's not whether or not you're good or bad. You're on a continuum. And that helps us as we begin to start moving forward. So our staff, we had a lot of people who was ambitious, who was running out, doing different things. So we had to kind of work with them. I would say pull them back, but it wasn't no pulling back. It just was a matter of damage control, but it's worth it. Like an example is, I may have administrators, well, I've had this happen in the last few weeks, who reach out to me and say that, hey, we was teaching about Black Lives Matter, right? And ultimately, there are certain people, certain students, and everybody was saying all lives matter. So what do we do with this when staff is saying this as well? And how I pretty much approach it is telling individuals that what you have to do is you have to go deeper in the conversation. And so I asked the question. I said, when you say Black Lives Matter, are you talking about the fact? Are you talking about the organization? What are you talking about? And when you talk about all lives matter, are you talking about the facts? Or are you talking about the political movement that's designed to go against Black Lives Matter? So help me understand this. And from having conversations with administrators, which when they're unable to resolve challenges with families, guess what? I'm one of the ones that get to talk with families. I have to do that as well, and have to lead families sometimes on this pathway who wants to clump everything together, because some parents that I run into are saying, they'll say that I don't want Black Lives Matter taught. I don't want nothing taught. I just want us all to get along, and I just want us all to be loving and all of that. That's the continuum. And so I spend time with them, sometimes hours, talking with them about what's going on, validating some of their points, as well as telling them where we are as a district and where we are as a culture. Because one of the number one things that you're going to be running up against is Brian Stevens kind of talked about as well. When race become politics, you're in trouble. And that's what we're dealing with as a nation right now. It's about politics. One person says one thing, another person says another thing. One person say Black Lives Matter, someone to say Blue Lives Matter, which is nonsensical to me. And I shared it in forums with everybody. I was like, you can never compare a human life with a profession. It's a job. You retire from that. You move on. You can get out of the uniform, but you never get out of the racial thing. So I hate to go on my soapbox. Let me pull myself. Right. So, but that's one of the things that you will discover that is happening internally, but it's all good, especially when you have the proper team around you for support. I would say, one thing that I think I'm so passionate and our team is so passionate about Spokane Public Schools is because we have a team around us who support us. When we deal with challenges from people who are battling against us, I can go to Nicole, I can go to Rebecca, I can go to Carlos, I can go to Boris, I can go to Laura, I can go to our superintendent. I can go to our superintendent, knock on the door and say, this is the deal. And I'm gonna switch it over to my Southern vernacular. Hey, we got problems out here with all them folks. They got issues. We need to get this resolved. And he'll listen, right? Not being of color, he'll listen, and he's so hungry to learn to where he sits and he listens. If I tell him about a microaggression going on, we may have to spend an hour or two me trying to explain what it was, but he'll sit there and listen, and he does better the next time. So I feel fortunate that we have that. And so Nicole talked about the community. I talked a little bit about the staff and students. One thing that I'll tell you with the students are more vocal than they have been. I think Nicole has a couple who I'm gonna call mentees who are, I want to say, turning things upside down, but she has mentees right now that's in schools that are literally speaking at city council about issues within school and the community. She has also some talking to the school board about changing mascot. And these are powerful individuals who are coming forth from culturally diverse background, who are bringing transformation to our whole city. And so I believe that it all comes on the back of us being able to say that, hey, we got teams, we locking hands with each other. And even in the difficult times, we're sticking it out.
I could listen to you for hours, Oscar.
And I want to just throw in one more thing about the IDI, as far as the district's commitment to it. So not only are schools, principals and staff taking it, but our superintendent made sure that the board took it. And then now the district leadership team, they're all taking it and doing those individual feedback sessions with me. So, this is a very purposeful, that's the other thing, we can't just fall into this. It has to be purposeful and planned out. And, we have to have that that goal in mind. Like this isn't something you can just stumble through. And so I'm so thankful for working at this district right now in this time, with leadership that we have who has the commitment to do their own work so that they can do outside work better.
Can you talk a little bit more about IDI? And, you know, it sounds like you all have, you know, a great leadership team that is willing to listen. So what about schools and communities that might be like, I'm not having any of this stuff.
Right.
This is too touchy-feely for me. So
Right.
can you explain like the process of how IDI works and how that might be able to be more successful than, you know, other ways of trying to build those bridges?
So what I have found, so there's different tiers. I'm going to talk about it kind of in tiers, the way the training goes. So tier 1 would be like all the schools are all getting this. So tier 1 training is like onboarding training is going to have a section on anti-racism training and what that looks like in the school and what anti-racism work looks like. And then there's through WEA, I can't think of what it stands for, Washington Education Association, so the union, they have culturally responsive modules. And I think they've done district-wide, they've done modules 1 through 3, and they still have 4 and 5 to go. And then they're also catching the new hires and, you know, all of that. So that's the tier 1. And then tier 2 is what I was talking about with the book studies and the IDI. So that is schools are reaching out to me saying, okay, we want to continue in our journey. And so that's where the tier 2 trainings come in. And so with the IDI, it's not mandatory, but what I found pretty hilarious is that people aren't sure about taking it. So there'll be a group that's going to be like, yes, we're going to take it. And then once those people start having sessions with me and they start talking to each other, and all of a sudden more people are signing up, more people are signing up. So, so although it's not mandatory, that's how we've gotten it rolling. And then our tier 3 trainings that are out of our department encompass Julie Schaefer, who is our restorative practices manager. So she does all the kind of restorative interventions that need to happen. So, you know, if they're around these racial incidences, she goes in and she does that. If it's staff to staff, you know, issues, someone said something offensive, you know, there was, I won't give an example. Yeah, there's, you know, staff will say things that are above microaggressions, but still out of ignorance. And Julie will go in and do that repair work. So we've kind of rolled it out in tiers. It's not only mandatory one is that culturally responsive that's district-wide and has several modules.
Also, James, I would tell you is if anybody who's looking at IDI, make sure your QA or the person who's leading it is someone who's not only passionate about the work, but someone who's going to take the time. Because as a district, we made the mistake probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago to allow for the wrong people to roll it out. And so while Nicole was going out working with some schools, I was on a whole different other circuit to where I was actually repairing the damage that had been done previously. And that's something that you have to look at. So if it's a tool you want to use, an amazing tool, it is not that complex, but you got to have somebody whose heart is in it. And they got to be looking not just at a promotionary track, and this is a great thing. That's the blessing with this season is that this is a time to strike and really help to get equity for individuals. The challenging thing is that it's a time to strike, and we as a culture, we like hip stuff. It's to be an anti-racist is kind of faddish for some people. And you don't want faddish people leading this kind of work. If not, guess what? On tomorrow, you're going to have a mess to have to deal with. It'll be even worse because whoever commits to this work, this is a lifelong journey in which they're looking at. And I believe that in every school district, every office, there is one person who is the person to lead the work. They may not know it, but I believe they are the person to lead it. And when we begin to start looking at equity and et cetera, something that I constantly say with our team, it's about surfacing brilliance. When you're looking at trying to roll something out like this, you need to find someone whose brilliance is connecting with people and genuinely want to see people move forward. And I think another piece to where, and I talk about our team, someone who have the patience as well. Me, I'm originally from the South. And so Nicole would tell you and other people would tell you, sometimes I don't have the patience. If someone says something that's a little too ignorant for me, I'm like, I'm out. You need to go talk to Nicole. I'm out. You know, you had to be on the rock for that one right there. I mean, you didn't catch what was going on the whole entire year, but I think that's the brilliance of our team. We're all on a different continuum. But when it comes to other type of stuff, right? That's me all day. Everybody, that's me all day. I can deal with the most sometimes quite litigious type situations, help to resolve them and save a lot of money, as well as help to resolve conflicts that's at a very high level. But that's part of what we look at. So if you're looking to do the IDI, I highly recommend it. I highly recommend you having QAs, but when you pick the QAs, make sure they're individuals who who pretty much live that this is just not a career for them. This is a life mission to actually change culture, change society to where everybody can be celebrated and every voice can be elevated, as well as I digress to get ready to stop, James, is something that I'll tell anybody that's also engaging in this work. You have to address the what people are calling this, I think it called it the cultural canceling movement. The cultural canceling movement. Out of the gate, I would encourage you to address that because that's supposed to be what comes against or what battles against equity all the time, is that you're trying to end the culture. No one's trying to end the culture. People are trying to elevate all cultures so we can really have this exceptional melting pot that we call the USA. That's all that's happening. And so you have to address it though, because if you don't address it, it will address you and all the work that you're doing.
So folks, I have a ton of questions, but I want to open this up to you because I feel like questions is like basketball. You go on a run. Once one person starts asking questions and see that bucket go in, everybody's got questions. So I want to turn this over to you all. And you know, schools that have challenges with equity issues, or I think Nicole brought up this great point about looking at data and how do we turn this data around by thinking about policies and protocols. So Sonia, I think you had a question you want to.
Yes, I did. Thank you so much for your presentation and your energy. I really appreciate it. I could see the passion that you have in your work. So my question that I had, and really I was just curious more about the student listening sessions around, racial disparities and inequities. We've sort of played around with this. I'm curious who leads those type of student groups. I mean, it might be different people, but I'm curious about that. And also, when you have that sort of qualitative discussion, how do you go about quantifying or like moving it up to the next level or putting that into terms where you can, I really like the idea of the survey, right? So that's one that you have sort of like objective, right? But so I don't know if you can speak at all to your experiences with those things.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Sonia. I think it's, I didn't say your name right,
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I would say in terms when we begin to start talking about quantifying, we are very much so, we're a district that is, I think we're fortunate to have individuals that are more data, that are data, not data heads, but very into data, right? So quantitative data, they're into it, right? And we also have a high level of qualitative data that's going on. So when it comes down to our student listening session, the people who are leading, I may lead some, Nicole may lead some. We have a whole team within our department who actually goes out, who's at all the schools, secondary schools, that's actually leading them. And most of the listening sessions, Nicole or myself attends, and uniquely with the work that's going on, Nicole and I have a direct connection to our superintendent as well as our board of directors. So as we're hearing themes and patterns, we take that information straight up to the ladder. I actually in our district, I sit on the district leadership team. I'm like one of the seconds, right, to the superintendent. So that helps a lot. And so when you look in, I think that's something you're bringing up a great point, Sonia, that needs to be looked at, is that you can't have students sharing their cares, their concerns, their trauma with you, and you do nothing about it. And so our students know that once something is shared with us, we're going to bat for it. I would even say Nicole, probably on this week, Nicole was involved in something that had to do with sports. Right? I think I was involved in something that had to do with sports too, right? That had to do with an equity issue. And that's not our particular area, but If a parent reaches out to us, if we find out about a student, we're going to be right there. We're going to make sure a warm body is going to be there, somebody who's going to know policy, procedure, and someone of which which staff has respect for, but also staff knows they're going to bring a level of accountability. That's something that's part of our role as well. How do you help staff grow? But at the same time, this is me. While I'm helping staff grow, you will not be wounding other kids' souls. I don't do that. I mean, it means that I'm going to help you grow, and I'm going to be very explicit in some of my language, and that don't mean provocative, explicit in terms of being able to say that this is the deal. If certain things you can't say, hey, do you understand this person's story? If you understand this person's story, you're going to move on that cultural continuum way farther than where you are right now. You can't treat everybody the same because no one's the same, and you don't want to be treated the same, so stop doing that. So that's what, did I answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, those are all things to consider, you know, looking at how many students attend these sessions, right? And then sort of, how do we really get a sort of focus group or that's representative of our student body is also a challenge, right? Because you have certain students that are more passionate around this work. And so also more, you know, have different experiences where they might, so then we're sort of playing around with how do we get a clear picture of our student body? How do we pool students to make it an equitable experience? Also being that if we're sharing things up with admin is a sort of challenge, but no, I appreciate your thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm.
One thing to add on that piece as far as getting the student voices in the listening session. So, some of our staff, a couple of them are on, so Julie Schaefer and Rebecca, have met with, gone to the individual schools, I guess, on Zoom, and met with principals and whoever on their admin team to talk about what a listening session looks like, to really walk them through that process. And then schools themselves have been responsible for making sure that students attend. And we're very frank in the sense that, no, we don't just want ASB students, right? Like, how are you reaching, you know, all the pockets of kids? And so I think it's been eye-opening for us in the sense that sometimes there'll be a listening session and there'll be all staff and no students. So what does that say about the interaction with the schools? What's going on? Like, they can't, you know, if each of them brought 2 students with them to this meeting, you know, we should have a group. So why is it that they can't even, you know, so just know that there are some schools that we've come across that haven't been able to bring students. So that's a whole nother conversation, right? So, what does student engagement look like? So then we have to back up and start further back.
Sure.
So,
Thank you.
I just wanted to share that.
Well, and also, Sonia, I think something that, you know, comes into play as well that can be a benefit is many people on the line, you and your school staff, you're doing this work. For all intent and purposes, without carrying a title, you consider a cultural broker. Right? You serve as a liaison between populations of students, staff, and families that the normal structure cannot engage for whatever reason. And so even when you begin to start talking about increasing voice, getting those individuals to the table, I say that cultural brokering hat, being able to locate certain students that do jive with you, do connect. Jive that's an antiquated term. I'm sorry. Somebody gonna have to help me update it because I don't know what the current lingo is. I'm out. You know, I'm not in the crowd yet. But you find those individuals who are those cultural brokers who can actually do a lot of that type of thing for you, because we know that that there are certain populations that it requires someone who can be that emissary or that go-between or that liaison who can really begin to start helping you to build a relationship. We do that throughout our department. I mean, if you look at our staff, it's quite interesting. If you look at the staff of our department in comparison to the diversity of the district, it's something we smile and laugh about, but and we can talk about that later. But we have cultural brokers who are ready to engage at any given time.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Istak, and I'm a restorative practices associate at Austin, in Austin. And so I had a question about, first of all, thank you for everything that y'all shared. I wish there was like a little fire reaction, because that's what I wanted to react to, like, everything. And so one of the questions that I have is, what do sustained conversations look like on your campuses? And how does that look like between campus and community? Because a lot of my role, I'm localized to my campus. I do anti-racist, culturally responsive, everything on my campus. And so it's all about like building the capacity of my staff members, building the capacity of our students, working with our student equity council, working with our classes that focus on anti-racism. And so I'm very localized. And so I'm just curious as to how do you build that capacity first and then extend it into the community, because it's something I would love to do, but right now it's like I have to build that foundation before I can go outward. And so I was just curious and wondering if you would be willing to share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so where that part of the resolution came from, just to give a quick snapshot, was I had someone on Facebook, social media, right, tagged me into some conversation that a student and a parent and a assistant principal were going back and forth about. The assistant principal had said something on Facebook that was offensive, and it was something racial. Again, it was an ignorance piece, not a volitional, but still. So as it was going, someone tags me in, and so I look at it and I'm thinking, you know, what could, because this isn't the only space this is happening in, so what could we do? So I actually wrote a grant to do this. So the grant where we will do, we're gonna have some pilot schools, and we will do, when you're talking about the anti-racism training, so what the teachers are experiencing, the training they go to, the community, so the parents and the families that are in that neighborhood that would go to that school. We'll also do the same training separately, and then we'll bring them in together to have a conversation. And also, and the reason why I call it sustainable conversation is because I don't really love the term courageous conversation, because people come and they yell at each other and they're very courageous in being mad, and then they leave and there's no repair, there's no, so with that, let's talk about our experience. So with this training, now let's talk about our experiences, you know, as a parent, this is what I've experienced with my student and where I've been concerned. And as a teacher, you know, this is what I'm trying to do, and this is my oops, and this is where I caused the ouch, and you know, what does repair look like? And then with that, quarterly, to bring those two groups together to continue in that conversation and relationship building. And so it's to parrot the same training so that families are seeing that teachers are being trained because they're experiencing the training as well, and then bringing them together to work together and develop relationship and rapport.
And also ESTAC, is that right? When you are counter to Nicole's point, is definitely while you're focusing on your particular area of influence, immediate sphere of influence, something that can be beneficial is, you know, having additional staff that can work on it outside, as well as locating a partnership with a community organization that very much so have a similar vision and mission, but they have a different lens. Because we have an organization that we partner with, Stand for Children, right? I can call Stand for Children as an outside organization, and I can say internally, we're doing these things. Will you be interested in doing this? And the person who's over it say, I got it. She'll mobilize the community to be doing something similar to what we're doing inside. And we meet together quite frequently to calibrate her efforts and stuff. Even though she's her own autonomous organization, through respect, I can call her and say, hey, can you do this for us? Or can you not do this for us, right? Because you're messing with the internal dynamics too much for us. And I think when you're looking at the work and looking at being able to have sustained conversations, the more people you can bring into it from the outside to kind of support you, it's going to help with the longevity. Because one thing I would say with everybody who's on the line and you're doing this kind of work, first of all, I don't know you, but I'll say more than kudos to you, because this is not easy work. It is nothing like having to explain for the 50th time what you thought people understood. It is nothing like seeing people regress, right? During the election cycle, people regress. Someone, your best friend one day, the next day it didn't go in the direction they wanted to, and all of a sudden they can't stand it. And you're like, what happened? I thought you was just at my house for a barbecue. What's up? But this is part of the work, right? Because I'll say a part of the human experience is that we find out how fickle we can be. And so the more support that you have around you is something that I just encourage. You need somebody who you can laugh with. You need someone who can sometimes challenge your thinking. You need someone who can pick you up. Sometimes you need somebody who can pull you down a little bit. You need all of those things as you're looking at the work. And that's how I began to start looking at having sustained conversations, because even with our team, you'll meet our team, and most of our team carry the same personality as you see Nicole and I. We're very much so in love with the work. We engage the challenges, we engage the problems, and we do the best that we can, but we got each other back, right? And we got leadership staff who got our back, so.
Thank you. Yeah, that gave me a lot of good insight. And I usually need somebody to pull me back. So thank you so much.
We have time for maybe one last question if anybody wants to get one under the bell. Hearing none, I heard through a little, what are they called? A little, I forget, I'm horrible at cliches. Little birdie, I heard through a little birdie that it's Oscar's 25th birthday. So Oscar, happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.